David Ross signed the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning. He didn't read them. Didn't hesitate. Just flipped to the last page, scrawled his name across the line, and slid the folder back across the kitchen table. His wife, ex-wife now, stood by the counter. Her name was Margaret, 42 years old. Thin shoulders, hair pulled back in a loose bun. She wore the same faded jeans she'd worn for the last 3 years. She didn't cry, didn't speak. David laughed. Not cruelly, just relieved. Finally, he said, standing up and stretching like he'd just finished a long shift. Took you long enough. Margaret folded her arms. She looked at him the way you look at a stranger on the bus. You didn't even read it, she said quietly. David shrugged. What's there to read? We're done. You get the house. I get my freedom. Works for me. He grabbed his coffee mug, the one that said world's best dad even though their daughter barely spoke to him anymore, and walked toward the door. Margaret watched him go. David. He stopped. Turned halfway. Yeah. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Then said, nothing. Never mind. He left. The door clicked shut. Not a slam. Just a soft, final sound. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen she'd cleaned every day for 18 years. She stared at the divorce papers. At his signature. At the line where her name used to be beside his. And for the first time in a very long time, she smiled. David moved into a downtown apartment 3 days later. It was everything he'd wanted. Modern. Sleek. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. No toys on the floor. No reminders of school projects or grocery lists stuck to the fridge. Just him. He bought new furniture. Leather couch. Glass coffee table. A sound system he'd always wanted but Margaret said was too expensive. He went out every Friday. Met up with his college buddy, Greg, at sports bars. Watched games. Drank beer. Flirted with waitresses half his age who smiled, because it was their job. You look good, man, Greg said one night, clinking his bottle against David's. Younger. Like you got your life back. David grinned. I did. He didn't mention that his daughter, Sophie, hadn't answered his last 4 calls. He didn't mention that his boss had started giving him side eye at work. He didn't mention that when he scrolled through his phone, there were no new messages. No one checking in. No one asking how he was. But he was free. That's what mattered. Meanwhile, Margaret did something she hadn't done in years. She went to lunch with her sister, Claire. They met at a small cafe near the park. Margaret ordered soup. Claire ordered a salad and spent the first 10 minutes studying Margaret's face. You look different, Claire said. Margaret stirred her soup. Different how? I don't know. Lighter. Margaret smiled a little. Maybe. Claire leaned in. So, how are you really? After everything? Margaret set down her spoon. She looked out the window at the people walking by. Mothers with strollers. Teenagers on bikes. A man holding hands with a woman, laughing about something small. I'm okay, she said. Better than okay, actually. Claire raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I thought you'd be. I don't know. Devastated. Margaret shook her head slowly. I was devastated. For a long time. But not because he left. Because I stayed so long. Claire didn't say anything. Margaret continued. Do you know what it's like to be married to someone who doesn't see you? Who walks past you every day like your furniture? Claire reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I do now, Claire whispered. It started small. David didn't notice at first. He got a call from his bank. A courtesy call, they said. Just checking in about some unusual account activity. What activity? David asked, half distracted as he scrolled through ESPN highlights. A transfer was made last week. Fairly large. We wanted to confirm it was authorized. David frowned. How large? $47,000. To a business account under the name Margaret A. Ross. David sat up. That's my ex-wife. She doesn't have access to that account anymore. Actually, sir, according to our records, the joint account was closed per her request 3 months ago. The funds were split per the terms of your separation agreement. David's chest tightened. What separation agreement? There was a pause. The one you signed, sir. September 14th. David hung up. He tore through his apartment looking for the divorce papers. Found them in a drawer, still in the folder, still mostly unread. He flipped through. Page 3. Page 7. Page 12. His stomach dropped. Margaret hadn't just asked for the house. She'd asked for half of everything. The savings account. The retirement fund. The investment portfolio he'd built for them, but always considered his. And because he didn't read it, Because he laughed and signed and walked away, he'd agreed. David called his lawyer. "Why didn't you tell me?" he shouted. His lawyer sighed. "David, I sent you the document twice. I highlighted the sections. I told you to read it before signing. You should have. You're a grown man. You signed a legal contract. That's on you." David slammed the phone down. He sat on his leather couch in his empty apartment and stared at the city lights. For the first time since the divorce, he felt something other than relief. He felt afraid. Margaret didn't spend the money on herself. She didn't buy a new car, or take a vacation, or get her nails done. She did something much quieter. She paid off Sophie's college tuition. All 4 years. In full. Sophie cried when she found out. They were sitting in Sophie's dorm room. Sophie had just finished her shift at the campus library and came back to find her mom waiting in the hallway with coffee and a folder. "What's this?" Sophie asked. "Open it." Inside was a receipt. A letter from the university. A confirmation that her student loan balance was 0. Sophie looked up, confused. "Mom, how?" Margaret smiled. "I've been saving. For a long time." That wasn't entirely true. The truth was, Margaret had been planning this divorce for 2 years. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. She'd watched David pull away. Watched him stop coming home for dinner. Stop asking about Sophie's school. Stop noticing when Margaret stayed up late balancing the budget or fixing the leaky sink or sitting alone in the dark because the loneliness was too loud. She'd tried talking to him. He'd say, "I'm tired, Marg. Can we do this later?" Later never came. So she stopped waiting. She met with a lawyer. Quietly. She opened her own bank account. Quietly. She started photographing every financial document, every receipt, every proof of what they'd built together. And when the time came, she filed. David never saw it coming, because he'd stopped looking at her years ago. Sophie hugged her mom so hard Margaret's ribs hurt. "You didn't have to do this," Sophie whispered. "Yes, I did." Sophie pulled back. Her eyes were red. "Does Dad know?" Margaret hesitated. "No." Sophie's jaw tightened. "Good." David called Sophie that night. She didn't answer. He called again the next morning. She sent it to voicemail. He texted, "Can we talk?" 3 hours later, she replied, "Busy." David stared at the screen. He wanted to be angry. Wanted to blame Margaret for turning Sophie against him. But deep down, in a place he didn't like to visit, he knew. Sophie had been pulling away long before the divorce. He just hadn't noticed. At work, things got worse. David's boss, a man named Stan, called him into the office. "Sit down, David." David sat. Stan folded his hands on the desk. "I'm going to be straight with you. Your performance has been slipping." David blinked. "What?" "No, it hasn't. You missed the Henderson pitch. Twice. You submitted the quarterly report 4 days late. And last week, you showed up to a client meeting unprepared. I've been going through some personal stuff." Stan held up a hand. "I get it. Divorce is hard. But I've got a business to run. I need you focused. If you can't give me that, I need to know now." David's throat went dry. "I can," he said quickly. "I will." Stan leaned back. "Good. Because Linda's been asking if she can take over some of your accounts. And honestly, she's hungry. She's sharp. She doesn't miss deadlines." David left the office feeling like the floor had shifted beneath him. That night, he sat alone in his apartment. No game on TV. No music. Just silence. He thought about Margaret. About the way she used to wait up for him. The way she'd have dinner ready even when he said he'd be late. The way she'd listen to him complain about work, about his boss, about traffic, and never once complain back. When did he stop noticing that? When did he stop saying thank you? David ran into Greg's wife, Amanda, at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, picking through apples. She saw him and froze. "David." "Hi." "Hey, Amanda." Awkward silence. She shifted her basket. "How are you?" "I heard about everything." "I'm fine," David said automatically. "Great, actually." Amanda nodded slowly. She didn't believe him. "Greg said you guys have been hanging out a lot." "Yeah." Needed to blow off some steam. Amanda's smile tightened. "Right." Another silence. Then she said, "You know Margaret came by last month." David's chest tightened. "She did?" "Yeah. She brought Sophie. They had dinner with us." David didn't know that. Amanda continued, her voice quieter now. "She seems good. Really good. Honestly, I haven't seen her that happy in years." David forced a smile. "That's great." Amanda looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "David, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did you ever?" "I don't know. Did you ever actually see her? Like really see her?" David opened his mouth, closed it. Amanda didn't wait for an answer. "I don't think you did," she said softly. "And I think that's the saddest part." She walked away. David stood in the middle of the grocery store, holding a box of cereal he didn't even want, and for the first time since the divorce, he felt it, the loss. Margaret didn't talk about David. Not to Claire. Not to Sophie. Not to anyone. She didn't badmouth him. Didn't post cryptic quotes on social media. Didn't tell people he was a bad husband. She just moved on. She started painting again. Something she hadn't done since before Sophie was born. She set up an easel in the living room and worked in the mornings, when the light came through the windows just right. She joined a book club, made friends, laughed at jokes, stayed out past 9 o'clock without worrying if someone was waiting for her. She wasn't dating, wasn't looking. She was just living, and it felt like breathing after holding her breath for years. Sophie noticed. "You're different, Mom," she said one weekend when she came home to visit. Margaret looked up from her canvas. "Different how?" "I don't know. You seem free." Margaret smiled. "I am." Sophie sat on the couch, watching her mom paint. "Do you miss him?" Margaret paused, dipped her brush in blue. "Sometimes," she said honestly. "Not him now, but who I thought he was. Who he used to be. Do you think he misses you?" Margaret didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I don't think he knew me well enough to miss me." David started drinking more. Not every night, but enough. He'd sit on his couch with a beer, scrolling through old photos on his phone. Pictures of Margaret, of Sophie, of family vacations he barely remembered because he'd been too busy checking work emails. He found one from Sophie's 8th birthday. Margaret had thrown a party in the backyard. There were balloons, a homemade cake. Sophie was laughing, covered in frosting. David wasn't in the picture, because he'd been at work. He scrolled further. Sophie's high school graduation. Margaret stood beside her, beaming. David was there, but in the photo he was on his phone. Christmas 2 years ago. Margaret had made dinner. The table was set with candles. Sophie wore the sweater Margaret knit for her. David had left early to meet Greg for drinks. He put the phone down. His hands were shaking. He called Margaret. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, Marg. It's me." Silence. "I know," she said. Can we talk?" "We are talking. I mean in person." Margaret sighed. "Why?" "Because David stopped. He didn't know how to finish that sentence. "David, what do you want?" "I want to understand. Why you did this. Why you took everything." Margaret's voice was calm. Steady. "I didn't take everything, David. I took what I earned. What I built while you were busy pretending I didn't exist. That's not fair. Isn't it?" David's throat closed. Margaret continued. "Do you know how many times I asked you to stay home for dinner? How many times Sophie asked you to come to her recitals? How many times I told you I was lonely and you said, 'Not now, Marg.'" David couldn't speak. "I gave you 18 years, Margaret said quietly. "And you gave me nothing. So no, David. I don't think I took everything. I think I finally took something back." She hung up. David sat in the dark. And for the first time in years, he cried. David's life continued to unravel. Stan called him in again. This time, there was an HR rep in the room. "We're letting you go," Stan said. David's world tilted. "What? Why?" "Performance. Attitude. You've been checked out for months. I can fix it. We've already made the decision." David left the building with a box of his things and no idea what to do next. He went to Greg's house. Greg answered the door but didn't invite him in. "Hey man, bad time." David frowned. "I just got fired. I need to talk." Greg shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Amanda doesn't really want me hanging out with you anymore." "What? Why?" Greg scratched his neck. "She thinks you're, I don't know, a bad influence. Said I've been staying out too late, drinking too much. She's not wrong." "So what? You're just cutting me off." Greg looked him in the eye. "Yeah man, I think I am." He closed the door. David stood on the porch alone. Sophie sent David a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A handwritten letter. In the mail. He opened it with shaking hands. "Dad, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll care. But I need to say it. You weren't there. Not for my recitals. Not for my games. Not when I got accepted to college or when I cried because kids were mean or when I needed someone to tell me I mattered. Mom was there. Every time. And you didn't even notice. I used to think maybe you were just busy. That work was hard. That you were doing your best. But then you left. And you didn't even fight for us. You just signed the papers and walked away like we were nothing. So I'm done, Dad. I'm done waiting for you to show up. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But I hope you know what you lost. Sophie. David read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his wallet. He carried it everywhere after that, a reminder of what he'd destroyed. Margaret was at the park, painting the sunrise, when a woman approached her. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Ross?" Margaret looked up. "Yes." The woman smiled. "I'm a curator at the Westwood Gallery. I saw your work online. A friend shared it. I'd like to feature you in our spring exhibition." Margaret's heart stopped. "You're serious?" "Very." Margaret had submitted her work to a small online art group 3 weeks ago. Just for fun. Just to see if anyone cared. They did. The exhibition opened 2 months later. Margaret stood in the gallery, surrounded by her paintings. Strangers walked through, reading the little plaques, pointing, whispering. Sophie stood beside her, holding her hand. "I'm so proud of you, Mom." Margaret squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of me too." David saw a photo of the exhibition on Facebook. Someone from the old neighborhood had shared it. "So proud of Margaret Ross. Check out her incredible work at Westwood Gallery." He clicked through the pictures. There she was. Margaret, smiling, glowing, surrounded by people who admired her. He didn't recognize her. Not because she looked different. Because he'd never really seen her before. David showed up at the gallery on the last day of the exhibition. He stood in the back, watching Margaret talk to a couple who wanted to buy one of her pieces. When they left, he approached. "Marg." She turned. Her face didn't change. "David, can we talk?" She glanced at her watch. "I have 5 minutes." They sat on a bench outside. David didn't know where to start. "I'm sorry," he said finally. Margaret looked at him. "For what?" "For all of it. For not seeing you. For not being there. For taking you for granted." Margaret nodded slowly. "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" She tilted her head. "What do you want me to say, David?" "I don't know. I want you to know I regret it. I regret everything." Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I believe you. But it doesn't change anything." David's chest ached. "Why not?" "Because regret doesn't undo 18 years of being invisible. It doesn't give me back the nights I cried alone. It doesn't fix the fact that our daughter doesn't trust you. And it doesn't make me want you back." David looked down. "I know." Margaret stood. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, David. I really do. But it's not me. Not anymore." She walked back into the gallery. David sat on the bench alone. He'd lost everything. And the worst part, he'd signed it away himself. David moved to a smaller apartment. Sold his car. Took a new job at a smaller firm with half the pay. He started therapy. Not because he wanted to. Because he had to. His therapist asked him one question that stuck. "When was the last time you were happy?" David thought for a long time. He couldn't remember. Margaret didn't think about David much anymore. She sold 3 paintings that year. Started teaching art classes on weekends. Became someone people looked up to. Sophie thrived in college. Called her mom every week. Visited when she could. They were close. Closer than they'd ever been. One day, Claire asked Margaret, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd stayed?" Margaret looked out the window. "No," she said. "Because I already know." "What?" "I would have disappeared." 5 years later, David sat in a coffee shop. He was older. Grayer. Quieter. He saw Margaret across the street, walking with Sophie and a small child, Sophie's daughter. Margaret was a grandmother now. She looked happy. David didn't approach. Didn't wave. He just watched. And he understood. She hadn't punished him by leaving. She'd saved herself. That night, David wrote a letter. Not to Margaret. Not to Sophie. To himself. "You had everything. And you threw it away because you thought freedom meant being alone. It doesn't. Freedom means being seen. Being known. Being loved. And you had that. You just didn't notice until it was gone." He folded the letter and put it in a drawer. He didn't need to send it. He just needed to remember. Comment below. If you could go back and change one moment in your life, would you? Or would you be too afraid of losing who you've become? Some people spend their whole lives chasing what they think they want, only to realize too late they already had it. David signed those papers laughing. But Margaret? She walked away smiling. Because she knew something he didn't. The person who loses everything isn't always the one who leaves. Sometimes it's the one who stays too long. And sometimes it's the one who never looked up. The end.